Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Cole. This will be the announcement for week 5 of Political Science 1013 on the second 8-week schedule for the fall term of 2024. Okay, everybody, the election is over. Let me mention once again, given that we were working on such short notice, I did not want to try to upgrade my class notes on the presidency unit at the last minute. So please keep that in mind as you read through those class notes. For instance, you'll see the 2020 Electoral College map in which Biden defeated Trump. Haven't got the 2024 one up yet. Also, you will see people on there like Biden's White House Chief of Staff, Jeff Zients. For the exam, I want to give you an article about the woman that Trump has picked to be his White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles. Yeah, that's right. Be the first woman to be Chief of Staff, White House Chief of Staff. But she's not in the class notes. We'll be revising the class notes between now and January, but can't do it right at the moment. All right, everybody. Our third exam will be the 21st, just before we stop for Thanksgiving. We'll take a week off for Thanksgiving. It'll cover units 5 and 6 on the presidency and the federal bureaucracy. The bureaucracy unit is a short unit. It shouldn't take you long to get through those class notes. There's 20 pages or so with slides. So I'll say a bit about that next time when I talk to you next week, a week from now. But looking very quickly at Unit 5 on the presidency, we begin by going through a series of recent presidents going back to Jimmy Carter and then Reagan all the way through to Trump and Biden, and now Trump again, of course, but again, we haven't incorporated the election results into the class notes. We talk about different roles that the president plays. Someone, a noteworthy scholar once said the president wears many hats: chief executive, commander-in-chief, chief diplomat, chief economist, chief of party. Different things that the president is called upon to do, all at the same time, shall we say. We look at what the Constitution has to say about the president in according the president powers and duties, especially with regard to, we emphasize the national security and foreign policy realms. Such issues as the War Powers Resolution that was passed during the Vietnam War era. We say a bit about emergency powers. Presidents tend to claim fairly wide sweeping emergency powers. We also say a bit about impeachment, which is in the Constitution. And there, of course, have been 2 impeachment attempts against Trump. He was not removed either time. The second one came just after he left office, after the first term ended, for the sake of trying to disqualify him from running again, but that, of course, was not successful. The Constitution also lays down the process for choosing the president, which includes the Electoral College. Okay. We talk a little bit about the presidential election campaign process. Everyone, this time around it was pretty unusual because there was little competition for Biden and Trump in their respective party primaries, making it somewhat unusual. Of course, we know Biden eventually dropped out after the primaries were over and the delegates had been chosen, but the conventions had not been held. He dropped out, and Vice President Harris, as we know, ended up getting the nomination. For 2028, we might expect that there will be several candidates in each party, and we will have competitive primaries beginning in early 2028, with perhaps several months of jockeying in what we call the pre-convention phase over the course of 2027, leading up to the presidential primaries and then the nominating convention in the summer, which we did have, of course, in 2024 as well. And then a 2 or 3 month general election campaign. Although the pattern has been for candidates to emerge as front runners in each party and clinch the nomination in effect fairly early. So in effect, they really begin thinking about the general election campaign as early as April of the election year. So it amounts to a 6-month campaign. We go on to talk about presidential power and resources that the president has to draw upon. These are more informal considerations of the political system and not necessarily things that are laid out in the Constitution, but resources that presidents can draw upon, say, for the sake of trying to influence members of Congress to pass a bill that the president wants passed. Okay? Presidents wage ongoing public relations campaigns in order to keep their approval rating as high as possible. Constantly, every few weeks, the public will be surveyed as to what kind of job do you think the president is doing? Excellent, good, fair report. Or do you approve or disapprove of the job the president is doing? And the president wants those ratings to be as high as possible because that translates into more clout. If the president is popular and you go against him as a member of Congress, then that might come back to bite you at election time. If the president is not so popular, maybe not so much. It wouldn't be quite so risky to buck the president, if you will. So there are several resources the president can bring to bear for the sake of trying to get a bill passed, to influence members of Congress to pass a bill through Congress. Presidents don't always get what they want. Okay. So-called administration bills, legislation that the White House gets behind. Historically, presidents have no more than about a 50-50 batting average on things like that. So presidents don't always get what they want. We then go on to say a bit about the apparatus around the president that's been expanded the past 75 or 80 years ago, going back all the way to the presidency of Franklin D. Roosevelt. Presidents took on greater responsibilities, amassed more power, and they had to have more help immediately around them. So we now have several hundred people working in the White House for the White House staff. In addition, we have several small bureaucratic agencies that are more or less directly answerable to the president, who may have staff of several hundred of their own. These include the Budget Office, the Office of Management and Budget, the National Security Council. We mentioned a number of other bureaucratic bodies adjacent to the White House that are answerable more or less directly to the White House and the president to help the president do his or her job. Then there's the position of Chief of Staff, the position of Press Secretary. We wind up by saying a word or two about the cabinet, although we would emphasize that the United States does not have cabinet government in the same sense that the United Kingdom does. All right, then, everybody, the election. As I had said last time, the election really was unpredictable. Everyone anticipated an election that was somewhat closer than it turned out to be. There were polls showing either candidate ahead or perhaps nearly in a dead heat in the country as a whole and in each of the 7 so-called swing states that were thought to be pivotal to the outcome of the election. If you look at a range of possibilities from Harris by 3 or 4%, all the way over to a cliffhanger election, all the way to Trump by 3 or 4%, which was closer to the actual result. I think it was 51 to 47.5% in the popular vote. Votes are still being counted in some states, but that's about what it came down to, 51 to 47.5%, which is about the most favorable result for Trump that any poll had. We continue to have a problem for 3 elections now of undercounting the Trump support. Okay? And the pollsters had endeavored to correct for that and take steps to be sure that they counted the Trump voters out there. There's been some material published in the press one of the pollsters who had a better batting average on this than some others said, you've got to try to contact people where they live. You can't just cold call them on the telephone. One approach would be to have have a pop-up ad while someone is shopping on their smartphone on Amazon.com, and offer to let them take a survey. Well, stop shopping for a moment and take a survey. Maybe they get a buck or two off their order if they take the survey. But some pollsters think that's a better way of meeting the prospective voter where they are, as opposed to cold calling them, which we mentioned is more and more difficult as time passes, because fewer and fewer people have landlines, and many people do not answer their phone. They let it go through to voicemail. We talked about that to a considerable extent last time. Well, it was a victory for Trump. In neither 2016 or 2020 did he get a majority of the popular vote, but he did get that this time with about 51% of the vote. He outperformed expectations among younger voters, younger men especially. There continues to be quite a gender gap. He outperformed expectations with men of Hispanic or Latino descent, and to a much lesser extent with African American men. The abortion issue did not seem to do quite what the Democrats hoped it would do for them. They underperformed a bit with white women, white college-educated women, although they carry that vote. They didn't carry it by quite the margin they would have needed to make it a closer result. Okay, so we have a very interesting result that reflects a kind of a shift in the electorate. A couple things we might say. The result was decisive enough. We did not have a long, drawn-out dispute with lawsuits and the possibility of violence over whether the election was stolen or not, which, other things being equal, is a good thing. And we have a situation where we have voting less racially polarized than it used to be. It looks like Trump got 30% to 1/3 of the minority vote, the vote among African Americans, people of Hispanic or Asian descent. Okay. With the Democrats trying to compensate for that by trying to do better with college-educated professional white voters, where they might have struggled in the past. Okay, so you have more and more voters of color voting Republican, more and more white voters voting Democratic, so it's a less racially polarized electorate than it used to be, which arguably is, once again, a good thing. Okay. Now, there are people who are alarmed, worried, scared about what Trump might do now. Some people think it looks as though he doesn't have much standing in his way. He's going to have control of the Senate. It looks pretty sure his party will have control of the House of Representatives too. And it's said that the Supreme Court has a 6-3 conservative majority, with 3 of those 6 conservatives having been appointed by Trump himself. Now, if you talk to people, Trump voters especially, and you mention some of the things that Trump will say that scare or frighten people, they'll sort of laugh it off and say, well, he doesn't really mean that. And maybe he doesn't. Some of it is just to get a rise out of people, I suppose, or to indicate a willingness to say things that he thinks perhaps needs to be said that other people say you shouldn't ought to say. The willingness to say what people are thinking, but maybe think it's not respectable to say, perhaps. Well, some of the things that might happen: the deportation of as many as 15 million people, firing of 50 or 60,000 federal bureaucrats to be replaced with people who are more or less directly answerable to Trump, withdrawal from institutions like NATO, withdrawal from agreements over climate change that the United States has negotiated. Will he do any or all of those things? There's a little bit of talk floating around that maybe the deportation will be limited to 1 million or so, especially dangerous people who committed crimes or had a criminal record or may be associated with gangs, so on and so forth, rather than 15 or 16 million people. And something similar may take place with some of the other things that Trump has talked about doing. We don't know at this point. we'll have to wait and see. There are people who are very, very concerned, alarmed, worried, and there are others who claim that all that is overwrought. It's something of a novel situation. It reflects a fairly substantial shift in the electorate. Okay. And it's believed Trump may know a little more about what he's doing this time around than the first term, when perhaps he didn't really expect to win. And he's perhaps less willing to appoint people who argue with him and push back at him, which people will say is a good thing, that the president needs that. But he wants people who are pretty clearly telegraphed that he wants people working for him that are pretty committed to doing what he wants to do, and will do his bidding, shall we say. So, well, in the few minutes time we've got, we can't really say much more. We'll just have to watch very attentively as what unfolds after January 20th, 2025. Okay then, everybody. We have a discussion this week, Tuesday and Wednesday, in which you're asked to discuss why you think Trump beat Harris. We've asked you to look at a couple things, a couple of articles, one video clip you can look at. And then the exam next week, before we take off for Thanksgiving. You have two articles about the election, one by a columnist who's pretty happy with it, and another by one who's unhappy. You have an article about the new chief of staff, Susie Wiles. You have an article about, going back about a year, about Trump's plans for how he's going to, in his view, bring the bureaucracy under better control. Those will be the articles you're asked to look at, in addition to the class notes for units 5 and 6 for the exam on November 21st. And we'll say a bit more about that and about the notes for unit 6 on the bureaucracy about a week from now, when we'll talk to you again. Take it easy. Contact me as needed through the course website or david.cole@opsu.edu. Take it easy, study hard. Thanks a lot. Talk to you in a week or so.